Welcome to the Flag Bearer channel. This is Little Known Black History Facts. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. The sadistic socialite, Madame Delphine LaLaurie, who had a hidden secret in the attic. When one thinks of serial killers, one doesn't often think of slave owners. But black enslaved people died at the hands of slave owners many times. Marie Delphine LaLaurie was one of those who took pleasure in the cruelty that she could inflict on her slaves. Marie Delphine McCarty was born in 1786 in New Orleans, back when Louisiana was still a part of Spain. Her parents were prominent members of the Creole community in the area, and Delphine grew up among high society. Marie's family was part of the elite of New Orleans society. Not only was her family amongst the founding Creole elite, but even after Louisiana gained statehood, they retained a position of power in the state. Her cousin was the mayor of New Orleans between 1815 and 1820. Marie Delphine married a total of 3 times. Thanks to inheritance from her parents, her husbands, and her sharp business acumen, she was an independently wealthy woman. Marie Delphine and her third husband, Dr. Louis LaLaurie, purchased an extravagant home located at 1140 Royal Street in New Orleans. Marie was from then on referred to as Madame LaLaurie. The home was one of the largest and the tallest structures in New Orleans at the time. The LaLauries lived there. None of her neighbors were aware of the misery that took place inside. From the outside, it looked like a beautiful home in which to live. Madame LaLaurie knew well how to keep up appearances. Little did the people of New Orleans know her home was a hellhole. No one would have guessed the horrible secrets that were kept inside. The house has since become known as the obscenely cruel setting for the torture of slaves by the infamous Madame. Madame LaLaurie left a 150-year legacy of terror. As was the custom in New Orleans at the time, enslaved blacks were kept in attached quarters. There was the 1724 Code Noir law in Louisiana that forbade the severe mistreatment of enslaved persons. The LaLaurie slaves were kept in horrid conditions even by the standards of slave treatment, and were usually half-starved. At that time, New Orleans had a large black population of freed and enslaved people. Madame LaLaurie was known in public to be polite to black people. Regardless, rumors spread of the family's mistreatment of their slaves, prompting an official investigation. Rumors were going around that she liked to abuse her slaves. Suspicion of her mistreatment became so widespread that a lawyer was dispatched to Madame LaLaurie's mansion to remind her of laws regarding the treatment of slaves. When the authorities investigated her home, LaLaurie skillfully evaded prosecution with a mix of bribery and manipulation of the law. Legally, Delphine's slaves could not testify against her, and any free witnesses were paid off. All Delphine had to do to avoid justice was swear before a court that she had done nothing wrong. A local attorney who investigated the allegations of mistreatment agreed that he found no wrongdoing. A record fee of $300 was paid to attorney John Grimes to defend LaLaurie against the state's prosecution. $300 in today's money is around $7,900, a large sum that suggests that part of Grimes' defense was used to pay off witnesses. Stories of mistreatment persisted, however, including accounts of a prominent 19th century writer who visited the city in 1833. One account described Madame LaLaurie as becoming enraged when a 12-year-old slave girl named Leah accidentally snagged her hair while combing. The story goes, she was brushing Madame LaLaurie's hair when she accidentally pulled too sharply, and Delphine picked up a whip and chased the poor girl through the house. LaLaurie allegedly chased the girl around the room with a whip until the child jumped off the balcony to her death to escape the lashes. After that incident, the LaLauries were found guilty of cruelly abusing their slaves and were ordered to forfeit about 10 of them. The slaves were taken away and scheduled to be sold at a public auction. but LaLaurie persuaded a relative to purchase the enslaved workers and return them to the mansion. No one could say much about this since the slaves were gifted back to Madame LaLaurie. There was no law to prevent such an occurrence. Poor Leah was buried behind the mansion grounds. On April 10, 1834, a fire broke out in the kitchen of the LaLaurie mansion. When the police and fire marshals arrived, the story told is that they found a 70-year-old woman, the family cook, chained to the stove. The cook confessed that she intentionally had set the fire as a suicide attempt because she feared Madame LaLaurie intended to take her to the torture room as punishment. The cook claimed that anyone taken upstairs to the room never came back. This account, reported in the local press, led bystanders the next day to demand that the torture room be inspected. When the LaLauries denied them entrance, they broke down the doors and found 7 mutilated slave bodies. Within the room, they found a whole new set of horrors. Some were stripped naked. Some were chained to the walls with iron collars and shackles. They each were emaciated and had been terribly mutilated in various manners. Of those who could tell their stories, they stated they had been kept there for a number of months, enduring horrors few could imagine. When the discovery of the torture room became widely known, a mob attacked the LaLaurie mansion. The surviving slaves were rescued and brought to a local jail for a macabre public viewing by more than 4,000 New Orleans residents. In all, the rescuers discovered 7 slaves, 4 women, 2 men, and 1 so mutilated they could not determine the gender. All were covered with scars and loaded with chains. They had been in prison for several months and were extremely malnourished. Stretchers bore the victims to the city hall where they were laid out in public view. As the property was excavated in the coming days, graves containing bones from several bodies were found under the home. Investigators later found several bodies, including 1 child, buried throughout the mansion grounds. Accounts tell that as the mob assembled to attack her home, Madame LaLaurie and her family escaped the mansion just before the mob took control of it. Madame LaLaurie calmly drove away from the Royal Street home as if going for her daily afternoon ride. However, she never returned to her home. Instead, she fled into legend. Accounts vary, but Madame LaLaurie supposedly continued to live in Louisiana under an assumed name, fled to New York, or lived in exile in France until she died, gouged to death during a wild boar hunt. The LaLaurie home was all but destroyed by the fire and the further damage done by the enraged citizens. It sat as an empty shell for several years before being taken over by a new owner who rebuilt it. In the intervening years, the property has served many purposes, everything from a high school, a home for wayward teens, a music conservatory, an apartment building, and retail space. It was returned to its original purpose in more recent times, and in 2007, actor Nicolas Cage bought the property as a private residence. However, it went into foreclosure just a few years later. The mansion that LaLaurie lived in now is a landmark in the French Quarter in New Orleans. It is said to be haunted by those tortured by Marie Delphine LaLaurie. Until next time, if you like little-known history facts as I do, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Press the bell to be notified of future uploads. Thank you for watching.